Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Hello. This is Karen. I am Samanth, in case you were confused about who is who. I'm going to dive right in because we have so much to talk about, and AI needs no introduction. But I think, I've been reading Karen's excellent book, which everybody should buy, Empire of AI, which is available at the bookstore there. And I'm going to kind of ask her to talk us through some of the chronology of the book itself, because I think it spans a very interesting period. But then also kind of go beyond the book and talk a little bit about themes that are not exactly present there, but kind of touch on it. So the book itself, chronologically, if you think about it, it begins, I think it's like August 2019, which is when you kind of walk into the OpenAI offices with the waterfalls, and you talk to Brockman and Ilya in a conference room. So it's such a long time ago. I mean, it's only 6 years ago, but it's such a long time ago, pre-pandemic, pre-chat GPT, that it's kind of even difficult to conceive of what the mood was like in the industry at the time and whether people thought it would come as far and as fast as it has. So tell us a little bit about the frame of mind in which you found these people in at the time.
Yeah. I was a reporter, an AI reporter at MIT Technology Review at the time, and by pure coincidence ended up becoming the first journalist to profile OpenAI, which is why I was spending time in their offices. In August 2019, they invited me to embed for 3 days within the offices, interview all of the executives, have lunch with the employees, and so on. And it's really hard to explain to people now how much OpenAI was not really considered a serious company at the time. Within the AI world, it was seen as this strange stepchild because they had just straight out of the gate said, we are going to pursue artificial general intelligence, AGI, which as a concept was largely unpopular within the scientific community because it was seen as a almost pseudo-scientific idea. Anyone who's talking about AGI is not a real researcher, is not actually part of the field. And in fact, many of the people who worked within OpenAI at the time were not part of the field. They were tech entrepreneurs, like Greg Brockman, who was the chief technology officer, had never done AI research in his life, had never even graduated college. Sam Altman himself, also a Stanford dropout. And
failed writer.
And a failed writer, yes. He thought about being a writer and then realized he wasn't good enough.
He would have been here, hawking his novels if it wasn't for OpenAI, yeah.
And so the culture within OpenAI was this idea that they were the underdogs, that they were trying to do something against everyone else disbelieving them, and that also they were largely trying to be beneficial for humanity, so they had set themselves up to be the anti-Google. They saw Google as dominating AI development at the time, and they were like, Google is a for-profit, we're gonna be a non-profit. Google isn't opening up its research, so we're gonna give all of our research to everyone and be really transparent, share knowledge with the world. And so it was this extremely academic, extremely mission-driven, and kind of renegade environment. But what I quickly realized when I was interviewing the executives is that while they positioned themselves as completely different from Silicon Valley, they were actually just a product of it. Because when I was in that very first meeting with Greg Brockman, chief technology officer, with Ilya Sutskever, chief scientist, and I just asked them simple questions like, why AGI? Why spend billions of dollars building AGI rather than, distributing that money to help alleviate poverty or trying to tackle already known technologies that we can use to mitigate climate change? They could not articulate an answer to that question. And when I asked, okay, well, part of the founding mythology of OpenAI is that you need to build the good AGI first before the evil people build the bad AGI. And I said, so what's like the worst that could happen if a bad AGI comes? And they couldn't articulate that either.
Well, they kind of spoke in generalities about the end of humanity and so on, right? I mean,
No, they actually didn't.
Oh, so they didn't even say that?
Yeah, no. So Greg Brockman was like, well, I think deepfakes are not that great.
Yeah.
So they hadn't really thought in depth about extremely basic questions about what they were doing, and I was like, wait a minute, I've seen this movie before. this is literally every Silicon Valley startup where you're given billions of dollars just because you have a compelling idea and you can sell it to the right people in power and holding the purse strings, but you haven't actually deeply thought about what you are doing, why you are doing it, how is it going to impact the world, how are you going to make sure that that impact is positive, and that is the story of Silicon Valley. And so just from the very first meeting, I started being suspicious of how they actually portrayed themselves.
Did they anticipate the pace of technological change that was to come? Like, do you think people were optimistic that within 3 years or 4 years we would have, ChatGPT 3, for example?
They did and they didn't, in the sense that in the very early years of OpenAI, they were already far more bullish than anyone else in AI research about the idea that there could be very transformative AI systems coming in just a few years. And they were projecting internally what they thought might happen with this particular approach of AI development that they were pursuing, which is taking existing techniques that had already been developed, specifically a technique from Google called the Transformer Neural Network, and then scaling it with ever more training data with the largest supercomputers that had ever been built in human history. And they were projecting these out, they call them scaling laws, like mapping out how they thought capabilities would continue if they dramatically jumped the scale of the data and the compute. And so they already anticipated that they would be requiring very rapidly far more than just billions of dollars, but actually hundreds of billions of dollars. And I think based on that, they had a sense that if this worked, if their scaling approach worked, that they would be talking about a very dramatic change in AI capabilities within only a few years.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that struck me as so strange when I was reading your book and reminded me of another time that is long gone is that in these emails and exchanges that you quote between Elon Musk and Sam Altman and Dario Amodei, for example, you sense, obviously these are private correspondences, so they're not being made for the public, but you sense a real kind of fear at the time that AGI could ruin humanity in some way, or a rogue AI could ruin humanity. Clearly, Elon Musk has decided to do that himself. But I was wondering sort of, at what point did that worry or concern start to become secondary or tertiary to these people? Or do you think it was always secondary and this was just some sort of vague do-goodism that Silicon Valley always bakes into its products before they take over the world?
It's hard because it's every single person in the original founding team of OpenAI actually, there's a different answer for that question. So with Musk, he's genuinely, I think, very fearful of this future. But okay, if I were to summarize like a large umbrella to encompass all of these different people's perspectives, all of them generally think it'll go well as long as I do it, and I need to do it first. There's no coincidence behind the fact that every single tech billionaire in this age has an AI company.
We run an entire country based on that principle.
Yeah, I mean, OpenAI starts, and then a bunch of people leave OpenAI to start Anthropic. Elon Musk also leaves to start xAI, and then later on, Mira Murati leaves to start her own AI company. Ilya Sutskever leaves to start his own AI company, as all of them become billionaires. And it's really not a coincidence because they're all trying to make this technology in their image. They all have this belief that they are the moral do-gooder, but they do have different positions on the question of why are they doing it, and do they genuinely believe that there might be a rogue AGI? So I think Musk genuinely is fearful of that. Dario Amodei and his team that founded Anthropic is genuinely fearful of that. Like, I've spoken, with people at Anthropic who their voices quiver when they're talking about the possibility of themselves and all of their loved ones dying in a couple years if AGI goes badly. Like, this is like a visceral reaction that they're having. Altman, people are never sure.
Yeah.
Like, does he really believe that this is a catastrophic future that might happen, or is it just a mythology that has worked really, really well in helping him amass a lot of resources and a lot of power for OpenAI? And I opened the book with an observation that he makes in 2013, 2 years before he starts OpenAI, the most successful founders don't set out to create companies, they set out to create religions, and it turns out that a company is the easiest way to do so. So he knew from the very beginning that there's this, in order to mobilize mass resources, mobilize a lot of talent, a lot of capital, and also a lot of public permission to accumulate a significant concentration of wealth and power within the hands of a few individuals, the best way to do that is to create that religion. So I think all of them have this weird mix of, if you were to speak with them, they genuinely think that they are doing the right thing. To this day, they all, like Musk he was like, of course I'm doing right by the world in his very narrow conception of what is right by the world. But they all have a very complex set of conflicts of interest as well, with financial interests, like political interests, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, religion is one way to put it, but I think that the key word in your title, the title of your book, is empire, and obviously you've chosen this for particular reasons, and I want you to kind of tell us the parallels between this and sort of what we might think of as orthodox imperialism, or
one way that I like to think of OpenAI in modern day is it's the modern day British East India Company. The parallels are extremely stark. They lay claim to resources that are not their own, training their models on intellectual property of artists, writers, and creators without their credit or compensation, training on public data available online and saying that it's just free, even though people are posting their children's photos online, not thinking that would get ensnared in their web of GPT models. They exploit an extraordinary amount of labor. So I detail quite extensively in the book the tens of thousands of workers that they contract, primarily in the global majority, including in India, where people are asked to do really horrific tasks in order to content moderate the models that OpenAI builds, in order to even teach the models how to respond. Like, the fact that ChatGPT can chat is because there are tens of thousands of people around the world that are teaching it, this is what a conversation looks like. Person A speaks, person B responds. Person A asks a question, person B answers. And they're paid a pittance, and the working conditions are awful. Third parallel is that the empires always monopolize knowledge production. That's part of the way that they perpetuate themselves, is by only allowing certain information that enhances their imperial agenda to exist, and anything that would undermine their expansion, they censor or they quash. And OpenAI in the AI industry does the same thing. They have become so resource rich in the last 10 years that most of the AI researchers now are bankrolled by these companies. Either their academic labs are funded by them, or they are employees of these organizations. And so there's both soft and hard ways that these companies distort what kind of research they're even allowed to produce. I talk about a case where one researcher, Timnit Gebru, ethical AI co-lead of Google, was just fired straight out because she tried to write a paper about the harms of large language models. And then the fourth parallel and final parallel is that all empires engage in this moralizing narrative that they are the good empire on a civilizing mission to bring progress and modernity to all of humanity. And they are competing with the evil empire. And Silicon Valley often nods to China as the evil empire. If the evil empire gets there first, then humanity's going to end up in some kind of hell. And that's why the good empire needs unfettered access to resources, to labor, to all of these things, because that's the only way that humanity will finally attain heaven.
Yeah, although, I mean, it's really interesting. Again, things change in such a short span of time. But you say that in the early days at OpenAI, there was some kind of like internal dissidence with this view. I mean, why shouldn't China, for example, develop its own AI? Why shouldn't Europe? I mean, there were people within the company or the nonprofit that thought differently. And yet, kind of, there's been a groupthink since then in the last 4 or 5 years that's really positioned the American AI industry as a kind of one pole, and every other AI industry out there is the opposite pole.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, like, employees have very different views than what executives might say in the public. And you have to understand that when these executives are talking, they're talking to a specific audience, which is the US government. And, like Meta, for example, has hired an enormous number of Chinese and Chinese American researchers, to the point that sometimes Meta is now called the People's Republic of Meta. And yet, Mark Zuckerberg is one of the #1 executives that when he speaks to the US government is like, we need to beat China, we're in a race against China, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But then, behind the scenes, he's like hiring up all of these Chinese researchers because they're really good. And it's the same with OpenAI. They're actually, I don't know today what the percentage is, but in the beginning, huge share of OpenAI researchers were not American. They are from all over the world. But when they had to figure out how to position themselves with the government, and I cite a lot of internal documents where OpenAI is talking about the strategy for how to make sure they essentially become backed by the US government, essentially, and get the allegiance of governments around the world, in fact. They talk about emphasizing these narratives like, we are in this race, we are in this race with evil companies like Google and with evil countries like China. And so it is all of this political game that they're playing, a geopolitical game.
Yeah, because my next question is actually going to be, of course, the tech industry had to come to a certain point before these advances were possible. But at the same time, it's difficult not to note that the empire of AI has been built at a time when there's been significant backsliding in the US in general in terms of human rights, free speech. Obviously, ChatGPT was released when Biden was in power, but it was after the first Trump presidency, and things have obviously sort of spiraled over the last year. So is there some sort of concordance that you see between the politics of mainstream America right now and the politics of the AI industry?
Yeah, I think both. You could argue that the US has long been an empire, but I think that with Trump 2.0, clearly America is explicitly articulating now that they want to rebuild the American empire around the world. So they are both Silicon Valley and Washington are in their imperial era. And this is why I use the analogy of the British East India Company, because I think the parallel with Trump administration is the British Crown and this relationship between corporate empire and nation state empire, where they are, it seems aligned, and yet also there's this tension where Silicon Valley is actually trying to build out its own empire irrespective of American interests. And many of them, there's this festering ideology within certain corners of Silicon Valley now that they don't believe in democracy, and they don't think that democracy is the best way to organize society anymore. And so their goal, unspoken, is to basically overtake the US government. Whereas the US government is still trying to control Silicon Valley as an American asset, and they're trying to strike deals all around the world with Silicon Valley companies, install all this hardware and software from Silicon Valley with the hope that it will be American assets that just continue to advance the American imperial agenda. And so what I think is interesting is now we're seeing this parallel once again where, the British East India Company became very weak at one point and then was nationalized by the British Crown, which is how India formally became a colony of the UK. And what is happening now is we're seeing OpenAI also starting to make certain appeals to the US government about maybe you should be backing all of the debt that we're taking out to try and build a computational infrastructure. And they're essentially asking for a government bailout, which is very similar. They're asking for whatever the modern day equivalent will be of a nationalization of OpenAI. And so it's like history rhymes always.
Yeah, yeah. And so the counterpole to the American AI industry is the Chinese AI industry. And I want to kind of ask you a little bit about how similar or how different the development of that has been. Because we didn't hear a lot about it until DeepSeek came out.
Yeah.
And DeepSeek made a lot of news because it was seemingly sort of trained without the same kind of large data sets. It didn't scale as much, but of course, I think now we know that it was trained sort of almost as rigorously. There was a Nature paper that was peer-reviewed a month ago that kind of talked about the fact that it wasn't actually trained on a small data set. It was comparable, if not as big. So how has the Chinese industry been different?
Yeah, so the main difference that's happened in the last few years is that the Chinese industry is not able to get a lot of computational resources because first the US government started using export controls, this mechanism to block NVIDIA and AMD chips from the best ones from going to Chinese companies. And now the Chinese government is also trying to block the acquisition of even the lesser chips by Chinese companies because they are trying to now accelerate the push to build a indigenous chip industry and trying to get Chinese tech companies to buy Chinese chips instead. But that's why there's been a cleavage in the path, because whereas American companies have just taken the approach of let's keep building more and more and more and more larger and larger supercomputers, the Chinese industry has been unable to do that. And so DeepSeek was the manifestation of this where, yes, the training data might not have been different, but the computational resources was significantly different. They used a tiny fraction of the computational resources that OpenAI had used to train their equivalent GPT models. And a lot of it's really remarkable. Like, when you read the DeepSeek paper, all of the techniques that they used to gain those efficiencies were techniques that existed in the literature. Like, they were doing a lot of clever engineering to take all of these different efficiency techniques and putting them together, but it wasn't like there was like a dramatic fundamental new innovation that allowed them to gain these efficiencies, which to me is remarkable because that means that the US companies could have done this all along, and they didn't. And it's partly, I think, because they've gotten intellectually lazy from the glut of capital that they have access to.
It's really interesting. There's a new book out by Dan Wang. I don't know if you've read this. He has this, the entire argument of the book is that the US has become a country of lawyers, and China is still a country of engineers. And everything that is, everything about their financial industry and about the way their society is structured and about their politics even comes down fundamentally to these two differences. And like what you're saying makes perfect sense because the Chinese have engineered their way to sort of a more efficient, less energy intensive kind of way of training these LLMs. Whereas the US, because they have access to all this capital, which is essentially lawyered up. You know, this is like a, capital raising is like a financial exercise that is left to people, that is not left to the engineers. And I think like that difference is particularly key over here as well.
And I think it's relevant also to Sam Altman's background because Altman is not an engineer or a researcher himself. He is an investor and a fundraiser. And so I think it is, once again, not a coincidence that OpenAI as a company, its success has, the critical path of its success has largely been one of accumulating more capital. And I think Altman probably designed the company in that way to make sure that he was on the critical path of success. Like, he's not the one thinking of breakthroughs. He's the one that can, as long as money is the input, he can, to create like more and more advanced AI capabilities, like he can be the CEO of the company. And yeah, I think that's really hurt OpenAI. Now we're starting to see like Google starting to overtake OpenAI and other companies starting to overtake OpenAI because they're starting to produce more fundamental breakthroughs now, and OpenAI was never set up to do that.
Yeah. Would you call the Chinese, the path to DeepSeek, would you call that fundamentally some kind of alternative path of AI development? And if not, sort of, are there other alternative paths out there that other countries might pursue?
I would say it's a minor alternative, like a branch off the main road of still producing large language models. But true alternatives, I think, would be what are the AI technologies that are not large language models? Because most of the problems that we have in the world are actually not going to be solved by large language models. Sometimes I like to use the analogy that AI is like the word transportation, where the word transportation can refer to anything from a bicycle to a rocket. They're all different modes of getting from point A to point B, but clearly they have different cost-benefit trade-offs, and they're designed to target very specific things. Like if I was using a rocket to travel from Bombay to here, that would make literally no sense.
Well, it does. Indigo's been canceled. So.
So that's, yeah, so we usually have specialized modes of transportation for that, maybe not Indigo in this case. And in the same way, I think most of the heavy-duty work that AI can do for us as a society will come from specialized modes of AI. And we've had that long before ChatGPT came out. You know, we've had that for decades. And there are many different examples, like Climate Change AI is this nonprofit, for example, that has done the work of categorizing all the different ways that different AI technologies could actually help support mitigating climate change rather than large language models currently exacerbating climate change. And that nonprofit was actually co-founded by a Bangalore native, Priya. But basically what they discovered, or maybe not discovered, what they know and stated in their analysis is that none of the AI technologies that they reference have anything to do with large-scale models at all. They all have to do with the bicycles of AI, these really tiny, task-specific models that can do things like optimize supply chains, optimize the energy consumption of a building or even an entire city, do higher accuracy weather prediction for building more climate resilient systems, integrating more renewable energy into the grid. Some of these systems can be trained on a laptop, whereas large language models are being trained on supercomputers running tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of chips 24/7 for months on end to produce a single model that can then chat with you. And so, yeah, like there's this crazy degree of capital misallocation, I think, that's happening right now, and talent misallocation, where all of the energy and focus is being put on these large-scale models that are leading to creations of empires of AI, and also to an extraordinary amount of environmental degradation, public health degradation, when in fact there are all of these alternative pathways of AI development that will really be the workhorses of true AI transformation.
But the question I want to, I mean, just to kind of pick up on that, I mean, you're talking about these specialized models that are trained on relatively small data sets that have relatively niche kind of tasks ahead of them. Developing these would probably sort of possibly preclude the development of a theoretical AGI at some point, because they're not general.
100%.
They're not general. So the two things I hear you saying here is that the development of an artificial general intelligence is not desirable.
Exactly.
But the second thing also is, and this is something we've learned time and time again from industry, is that if something can be developed, somebody's probably going to develop it, right? And so how do we sort of stave that inevitability off?
So first of all, I don't believe that anything is ever inevitable, and I do think that this pursuit of AGI is completely unwarranted. Not only because most scientists right now don't even think we're on the path to AGI, so like all of these resources that companies are justifying by saying it's worth it because we're getting to AGI, 75% of scientists surveyed this year, AI scientists, like the hardcore ones that actually do research, do not think that we're on the path to AGI and don't know if we can ever attain this theoretical technology. So that's number one. But the second one is, why are we building a system that is replicating human intelligence when we have human intelligence? Like, why are we using all of the Earth's resources to ultimately automate away us? You know, like, that's not the purpose of technology at all. The history of technology development, when technology leads to progress, it's when it actually supports people, not just erodes them away. And so that's like philosophically part of why I'm against AGI, but also from a purely commercial and like safety perspective, when you are marketing to the world that you are building an everything machine that can do anything for anyone, when actually you are building something that can only do some things for some people, what happens is that everyone starts using this technology to do all kinds of things that it's not actually designed for. And like when talking about like what it's not designed for, the moment you even move away from the English language, right, the technology breaks down. So how is this even a general purpose intelligence? It's not. But that's what leads to harm, is this mismatch between people's understanding of the technology and how they use it, and like the real capabilities of the technology. And this also makes it really difficult for the companies themselves, because they cannot anticipate all of the ways that people are going to abuse this technology, because they have told people that there's an infinite surface area of things that you can do with the technology. Like, how on earth can you anticipate in advance how to shore up an infinite surface area? You cannot. And so on multiple different fronts, I don't think that the pursuit of AGI is warranted. And the pursuit of narrow, specific, specialized machine learning models is much better, both for supporting people and also because then companies can actually make sure their products are safe before they try to diffuse them all around the world.
I asked Karen before the panel if she uses AI at all, and she said she doesn't. How many people in the audience do? Oh, wow. Okay, well, this is Bangalore.
That's actually less than I thought.
Yeah.
Usually it's 100%.
So my next question to Karen was actually going to be, you know, in sort of in a public service vein, which is for the people who do use AI out here, which is like a third of the audience, what advice would you give them about how to use it and which model to use?
So one thing that I'll say is I don't use generative AI, but I do use specialized AI models. One of the things that I did in my book was I was trying to detail the transition that OpenAI had from a nonprofit to Microsoft-backed juggernaut. And I noticed that they had a huge upgrade in their furniture, and I wanted to explain in some kind of way how that furniture upgrade, be specific about that furniture upgrade. And so I used Google reverse image search, which is a specialized AI model, and just ran a screenshot of a chair from one of their early offices through reverse image search, and then a screenshot of a chair from their upgraded office. And what I found was the first chair cost around $2,000 online, and the second chair was around 10,000 US dollars online. And so I put that detail into my book. But the thing that I would say is, like, first, always start with the problem. Like, what is the problem that you're actually trying to solve? And sometimes AI is actually not the right tool for solving that problem. One of the reasons I don't use Gen AI is because I don't, like, the problem I'm usually trying to solve is, like, building empathy with sources and writing well. Generative AI is not going to help me do either of those things. But if your problem is something that lends itself to AI, then the question is, okay, what kind of AI? Is it generative AI? Is it specialized AI? And then you should ask, based on, like, which type of AI you've decided, which provider of that AI should you use? Because with generative AI, for example, you have the closed source companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and Google. You also have open source models. And I would always advocate, if you can, use the open source versions, because at the very least, you are not giving your data and your privacy back to these companies. And in my framework, ceding power to the empires for them to continue perpetuating their expansion. And so all along the line, you should be thinking about that. And then if you're performing a particularly critical task where it is very important for it to be accurate or it's highly sensitive context, make sure you also have processes in place to then check that the AI did the correct thing, and that you continuously check. Like, if you are working at a company and you deploy the AI system, don't think it's like one and done. You should be continuously checking to make sure that the AI is still performant, because there's a thing that happens called drift, where when the real world circumstances change, the accuracy of the model also degrades, because the model is only as good as the data that you trained it on. And so from beginning to end, just like, think of it as an engineering problem rather than just, I think a lot of people, when they take AI out of the box, they think it's the everything machine. Let me just throw whatever, like, let me not do the thinking. Let the AI do the thinking. Let me just throw a bunch of data at it and hope it solves the problem. But in fact, I think the best utilization of AI tools is when you are still going through the entire process of thinking how to engineer your system well and where are the targeted points for AI to be used.
We have 7 minutes, and I think we have a lot of questions. Whoa, okay, there are mics here. So, whoever, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question to Karen. Karen, we all know that rogue AI is a threat to humanity, right? So, do you see in future the companies coming together to bring in a global policy with safeguards because they have their own business interest? Are the countries coming together to bring this policy because they have their own interest of increasing their empires? So what do you think about it?
I think what we might do is just take 2 or 3 questions together, and then we can answer them all at one go, just for efficiency. Yeah, go ahead.
So Karen, can you tell us something about the removal of Sam from the board? And what happened? What was behind the scenes there? Was it just because of safety concerns on AI? Was there something more?
Man.
It'd be interesting to hear that.
This is a gossip session. Okay. And the lady over here has a, yeah, sorry.
Can I ask my question?
Sure.
So if you think OpenAI and Meta, the Darth Vaders and empires of the Star Wars worlds, who do you think are the Luke Skywalkers and the Harrison Fords?
All right. Okay, 3 questions we have.
Let me just write these down. So on the rogue AI thing, I would first say that we don't know that rogue AI is going to be a threat. And my position is that this rogue AI being a threat is actually just a way to distract from the fact that it's the people that are building the AI models that are the threat. So like rogue AI, the idea is that the AI itself is somehow becoming conscious, but first of all, we have no idea whether or not that's even a possibility. And second of all, while we are focusing on that problem, like the people have already accumulated more power than pretty much anyone in human history, you know? And they're eroding away our democratic institutions, they're eroding away social cohesion, they're eroding away our fabric of truth in society. And so to me, like, I actually realized I didn't actually answer this part of your question, which is like, how do we contain the empires, is I think we need to think about broadening the definition of what AI governance means. Most people think AI governance is, the companies build whatever AI they want, and then it just, like, we have to then govern how the AI is integrated into society. But we should be governing what kinds of AI get built in the first place. There should be data privacy regulation. There should be transparency laws to actually know what kinds of data are being used to train these models, what kind of intellectual property are they taking, where are they putting their data centers, how much energy do their data centers use, how much fresh water resources do the data centers use to cool them. We should know, we should be having stronger labor laws to make sure that companies cannot just fire their workers to replace them with AI. You know, there are many, many different parts of the AI supply chain that all need to be governed, and I hope that companies and countries come together to do that. The second question on Altman's firing, I spent an extensive amount of time detailing the dialogue that happens behind the scenes during the firing and hiring of Altman among the board members for why they decided to oust him. So I would encourage you to read that part of the book. But it basically came down to two different forces. One was that Altman is a very controversial figure. He's extremely charismatic, but he's also, throughout his career, even before OpenAI, been followed by allegations of being manipulative, being abusive, and just not telling the truth. And there were serious concerns from his senior executives as well as the board members about the fact that he was once again engaging in this behavior, and it was leading to a lot of chaos within the company where teams were infighting because Altman was telling each of them what they wanted to hear, but in conflict with one another. And the second force at play is, I talk about the religious aspects of the AI boom. There are the people who genuinely believe in rogue AI being a threat, and the board was more doomer leaning in that regard. And so when they learned that Altman was creating this chaos and that it was eroding sound decision making at the company, for them, that meant potential catastrophic impacts on humanity. Like, the stakes were way higher to them than something like an Instacart where, you know, like the CEO is lying to people about groceries. And so those were the two forces that led to him being ousted. But then there were all of these different financial ties. And Altman is very, very good at making sure that he is the crux of any relationship where he's the one that will give the other person access to money. So like with investors, investors saw him as he's the one that has to lead the company if I'm going to get a return. And with employees, it's like he's the one that has to lead the company if I'm going to get a cash out on all of the work that I've done. And so that was what then got him back. And then the third question, the Luke Skywalker. I think Luke Skywalker equivalent would be the open source models, because as I mentioned, a core part of Empire is that they monopolize knowledge and monopolize narrative. And one of the key ways of eroding away the empire is by distributing knowledge more, by generating more knowledge for the public. And open source models are one of the primary ways that we have to do that right now. So much of what we understand about generative AI, about ChatGPT, is because of open source models right now. And we need more of those types of models and open source public research in order to continue fact-checking what these companies tell us and chipping away at that monopoly.
We have time for one more question. Can we give the mic to the lady in the front, please? Thank you.
Thank you. So, please could you provide some insight on how AI use leads to environmental degradation?
We have 45 seconds.
So, between GPT-2 and GPT-4, OpenAI increased the training data and their computational resources by over 10,000 times. if you think about that from just like the hardware, models used to be trained with maybe one chip or a single digit number of chips. Multiply that by 10,000 times. Now they're being trained on supercomputers with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of chips for one model. The industry is now trying to build data centers and supercomputers all around the world of this size. Mark Zuckerberg announced with a significant amount of pride that he has multiple supercomputing clusters planned, the size of Manhattan, that would use the power demand of New York City. And this, and like Altman actually said, he wants to build 250 gigawatts of data centers by 2033, which he estimates will cost just a mild $10 trillion. And someone did the calculation that that's the entire energy demand of India. Like that's to like say what adding all of India on to the grid once again by 2033. So most of this is coming from fossil fuel sources. There was this amazing investigation from this journalist Susmita recently talking about how 2 coal plants in Mumbai owned by Tata and Adani that were supposed to be retired are now having their lives extended specifically because of energy demand of data centers in India. And that is leading to more air pollution in communities. That is leading to more water pollution as well, because when these data centers are constructed, they lead to water pollution. There's been instances of that in India as well. And when they're running, they need fresh water to cool, and then that fresh water is polluted, and then it has to recirculate to the system, and sometimes it's not cleaned before it's recirculated. There's also obviously environmental emissions that are coming from the fossil fuels, so it's accelerating climate change. So there's just a whole number of intersecting public health and environmental issues that are coming from the construction of large language models on the so-called path to AGI.
On that bright and happy note, we have to end, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Karen. This has been great.
Thank you so
Karen's
much.
book is at the bookshop. Please go get it signed. Please buy it. Thank you for coming.